Hey, welcome everyone. We're going to give it another minute or so just to let the rest of the folks file in. So we'll be getting started very soon here. Thanks for your patience. All right, so let's get started. So really excited to talk to you guys today around standardizing backups across the hybrid cloud. This is a super pertinent topic, I think, as more and more of our environments are being migrated to the cloud, or more and more workloads are being spun up in the cloud, rendering us with hybrid or a multi-cloud situation. And for us, from a data protection lens, this certainly represents some challenges, a number of opportunities as well, but certainly some challenges. And really the whole purpose of today's call is how can we take the Veeam Data Platform, something that you know and love and have used to protect your on-premises workloads for 10, 15, whatever, however many years you've been using it for, and scale that out to the cloud in a number of different ways. Before we get started, a few introductions. My name's Sam Nicholls, Director of Public Cloud Product Marketing. So I get the fun job of looking after pretty much anything and everything that Veeam does with the three major hyperscalers, AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. And then I'm joined by two of my very favorite people, two of my very favorite Veemers, Mr. Anthony Spiteri and Leah Troscianecki. Anthony, why don't you go first and say some welcome words?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Yeah, so I'm Regional CTO for APJ and the lead cloud and service provider technologist. And from my point of view, working primarily in the cloud hosting world and infrastructure world, it's really interesting to now basically see how it's coming together with the world that Sam works in, which is that public cloud world. That is the essence of hybridity and the multi-cloud world. So looking forward to what we're going to talk about over the next 40 or so minutes.
Fantastic. And Leah?
Hello, everyone. My name is Leah Troscianekki, and I have the least interesting accent of everyone on this call, which is just quite fine with me. I've been in the Veeam universe for nigh on 10 years now, but I also recently came from Microsoft, where I did a stint, and it's been very interesting to watch how the storage conversations have evolved, moving from the worlds of Windows and VMware now to really a true cloud first kind of conversation. So we're really excited to chat more about how we standardize backups across hybrid cloud, because it's just not that simple anymore to kind of wipe the slate clean with an environment and start fresh. We've got to be figuring out how do we retrofit into existing environments while still finding ways to modernize and standardize and help us all sleep at night. So excited to chat with you guys about that today.
Absolutely. And I think with regards to the accent, I think it really depends on what your frame of reference is, because to folks like Anthony and myself, you do have an accent, Leah, and it's wonderful. We love to hear you talk.
I absolutely agree there as well.
So before we get started, a couple of housekeeping rules. Everyone was muted upon entry. That's ultimately just to ensure the best audio experience for all of you attending today. However, that doesn't mean that none of us want to hear from you. We absolutely like to keep these as interactive as possible and make sure any and all questions that you bring are getting answered. So to the right-hand side of your screen, I believe it is, there is the Q&A panel. So feel free to pop any questions, comments, concerns, requests in there, and we'll be sure to get to them throughout the duration of the webinar. And then, as always, we are recording this. So if at some point you have to leave early, or you have a colleague that you would like to share this webinar with, a couple of days will be after this webinar, we'll be sending out the slides and the recording so you can watch at your leisure. So without further ado, let's get started. And what I wanted to actually bring up first off is around cloud maturities. I think that depending on where you go, cloud maturities are defined very, very differently. So I wanted to take this, look at it through a data protection lens. So first off, we've got the legacy model, which is primarily running on premises with legacy systems. When I say legacy systems, I'm talking about your traditional, three-tiered monolithic application. You've got your web server, app server, and database. But all of that is running on the hardware that you have within the four walls of your data center. Maybe it is remote office, branch office, maybe it's at the edge. Irrespective, everything's running on premises. There's little to no cloud applications or footprint, and at this point in time, there are no definitive plans to adopt cloud services. Sure, there might be some conversations ongoing, but nothing set out in stone in terms of a plan. The next level up is looking at it from an opportunistic perspective. So the organization has sporadic utilization of public cloud services. I would say primarily that is cloud storage, right, as a backup target. So Veeam has long been able to take the backups that you create on premises and tear those off or copy those off onto object storage hosted within the public cloud. We started with AWS and Azure. We've more recently added Google, and that's across many different flavors of those object storage targets with different benefits in terms of cost and performance. And we'll get onto that in a bit. There might also be some SaaS utilization. I would say that this is probably the first route that folks go to hosting workloads, production workloads in the cloud, and namely Microsoft 365, especially since we've all been, working from home for who knows how many years now, well in excess of 3. Microsoft 365 has just exploded because of the advent of, not having to host your own Exchange server. We've got Teams functionality as well as all the other services that come within that, but also other tools like Dynamics or Salesforce. And then we might have a few infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, IaaS or PaaS workloads running as well. Essentially, a virtual machine running within the cloud where we've hosted our operating system and application, or maybe it's platform as a service like a database or a file share, but it's very, very opportunistic and sporadic. And that's ultimately because there's a limited definitive approach to efficiently utilizing the public cloud. The next layer up would be a systematic approach. So we now are matured into a repeatable, well-defined utilization of cloud services. If an application that requires this and is going to service this is going to be spun up, it is going to be hosted in the public cloud. That's also taking workloads that were running on premises and lifting and shifting them to the cloud. Again, this is more of a monolithic approach, so that three-tiered application approach that we discussed. So everything's running on a virtual machine, again, app server, web server, database. It's running in the public cloud, but it's as a result of a lift and shift motion. And then there is some degree of monitoring and analytics in order to measure our approach of the cloud from an efficiency perspective, a performance perspective, a cost perspective. And then the final one would be the optimized approach. So this is the organization that is primarily using the cloud and has developed and refactored their applications to be cloud native. So serverless applications, microservices, containerized workloads like Kubernetes as well, essentially just decommissioning those virtual machines and opting for things like functions as a service. Maybe that's Lambda in AWS, it's Azure Functions in Azure, and ultimately just utilizing other components, platforms as a service like databases and file shares, or software as a service like object storage. And yes, I do believe that object storage is a software as a service as their reference data, but again, getting rid of the virtual machines and going that serverless route. They've also realized that they live in this hybrid or multi-cloud world. They have their on-premises footprint, and then they have one or more public clouds, and they're craving that standardization. They want that federated management, monitoring, and governance of all of these workloads to help eliminate some of the challenges of the cloud, right? Multiple point products when it comes to data protection, cloud creep and shadow IT, workloads just being spun up, us not knowing anything about them, those going unprotected, and then when we face a recovery scenario or sometimes some people would say worse, a compliance scenario, we are out of compliance or we have no option to recover. And then everything is proactively maintained and optimized using that federated management, monitoring, and governance in order to boost security within the cloud, help control our costs, but then also deliver that inter-cloud operability. Again, not just a single pane of glass to manage everything, but also make our workloads and data sets portable across different infrastructures. So as the needs of the organization changes, or new services are brought online with the cloud, we are not locked in or out of any specific infrastructure or service. We're able to dynamically adopt those as we see fit, and data protection is no longer a hurdle. So with that in mind, I'm gonna kind of open it up to Leah and Anthony to really provide their feedback on those different cloud maturities, but then also how Veeam fits in. Leah, why don't we start with you first?
So I think what's really interesting, looking at it from this approach, is it seems to be, I think, more practical in the maturity models. I'm actually working on something right now with Microsoft looking at their cloud adoption framework. And it's similar in concept, right? Where we kind of look at what are the steps that need to be taken to migrate to the cloud, to retrofit services across hybrid architectures. And it has a very security focus in mind. But personally, I like thinking about it in a cloud agnostic approach. And the reality is, so many of you out there probably have multiple cloud providers at play, whether it's Microsoft or AWS, or you have SaaS, or maybe you're in a colo, or maybe you have a sovereign cloud because some of your operations are in Sweden and you need somebody in that particular region. So taking a look at something at this like cloud agnostic layer, I think is really helpful. And the other thing that I love about this model is it considers more than just security. I think security is absolutely top of mind, whether you are, an administrator level within this IT organization, or we're talking to a C-level executive. Everybody has security top of mind. But when Sam, Anthony, and I are out in the field chatting with folks who use Veeam every single day, cost comes up a lot. Cloud readiness comes up a lot. And honestly, one of my favorite things to talk about with folks in the field is this concept of portability, because I think it's a game changer. This idea that you're not locked into a specific vendor. I'm going to steal one of Sam's lines here and say that Veeam is the least prescriptive vendor on the market. We intentionally are not an appliance-based vendor. We're not all in on a specific cloud. We are software defined, storage agnostic. And I think that that keeps you ready for anything so that you can consider the entirety of this stack. Where can we be opportunistic? How can we up level to really think systematically and perhaps even get to that upper echelon of optimization and performance? So those are some of the things that are top of mind for me. But Anthony, do you want to add anything here about, conversations maybe you've had in the field too?
Yeah, I was thinking actually about my own journey. I mean, obviously from my point of view, coming from the ops side of things, where I've gone through that journey, from the point of view of on-premises to cloud and infrastructure as a service, through to the first line of SaaS when Office 365 first came into play, and then AWS with serverless, and what we're seeing today with the modern data platforms around containerizations and the advent of serverless, and even like a new one that's coming onto the fore is something called WebAssembly or WASM. So it's changing again, right? But I think it really goes down to this layered approach here. Unless you're a net new company, most mature companies are going to actually be at different stages of this, but also span across the different levels that Sam went through. And that's where, it's so important to have a vendor like Veeam that understands the totality of where you're at. Veeam's platform is modular, and it's basically got mobility front of mind, right? And that means that no matter at what part of the journey you're at, if you're going in and deploying new public cloud workloads, you can use the Veeam Backup for AWS product. But then again, if your company is doing that, but also still maintaining an on-premises, VMware environment or Hyper-V environment, then you can still, back that up traditionally, or as we would say traditionally. So I think that's the thing that I kind of get out of this, is that, the journey that we've all been on collectively, as a group in IT and technology over the past 15, 20 years has got us to this point today where we understand that we are definitely settled down into this hybrid world and also this multiple cloud world, okay? But the hybridity is the important part of that. And then how do you then enable, the protection of the data when you've got your data across different workloads, different storages, different locations across these platforms? So, the Veeam platform and everything that you see on the right-hand side definitely makes it one of the better choices out there.
Absolutely. So I think over the next, 15, 20 minutes or so, let's have a discussion about how the Veeam Data Platform actually fits across these different cloud maturities, right? Because nobody wakes up as a legacy and decides to go, I'm going to go fully cloud optimized today. It's very much a journey. The transition can sometimes be a little bit difficult, fraught with challenges, and it certainly takes a lot of time. So we really wanted to paint a picture of how Veeam is going to fit in across these different maturities, and then help you solve the challenges that are presented as you go through this transition. And I think the most prevalent one to start with first off is really just targeting cloud storage. And Veeam Data Platform, Veeam Backup and Replication has long been able to take backup data and tier that off into cloud object storage. So as you can see on the left-hand side, we have our production environments. I've just highlighted some VMs here, but that could be physical servers, whatever it might be. And we create that backup and place it within our scale-out backup repository. So the first place that this lands is going to be our performance tier. It's typically disk that is on premises within the data center that we own, and we call that the performance tier. And that's primarily because it's as close to the production environment as possible, and we can fully control the performance of that disk, whether we are choosing to back up to all flash or maybe it's some sort of spinning disk. But then as that data begins to age and the likelihood of us having to recover from that data diminishes, we can do one of two things. We can choose to do a backup copy into cloud object storage. So that might be Amazon S3, Azure Blob, Google Cloud Storage, Wasabi, IBM, like just any number of S3 compatible object storage, and place that in what we would call a capacity tier. So in the likes of AWS, this would be Amazon S3 object storage. It is around 2.3 cents per gig per month, and that's markedly cheaper, I would say, than running anything on premises. And it has a relatively high degree of performance. But again, as that continues to age, we can go to differing tiers of object storage within that cloud that gets cheaper and cheaper, but the performance and data retrieval costs, while the performance goes down, the data retrieval costs get introduced and then go up from there. So like an Amazon S3 Glacier Deep Archive, we're talking a 0.00099 cents per gig per month. So incredibly cost effective to help us meet our retention targets without blowing up our budgets. But again, the downside of that is it's effectively tape, right? And that's going to have data retrieval costs as well as a number of time, typically days, to actually retrieve that data. One of the most recent introductions, though, that we launched in V12 earlier this year was the ability to go direct to object storage. So bypass that performance tier that is storage on premises and write the backup directly object storage. So Leah, when might someone consider going direct to object? What would you consider some best practices around that?
And this is where, that least prescriptive vendor angle comes in a very interesting play, because I think that us on the cloud side of the Veeam team, we've had a lot of conversations about how to provide prescriptive guidance to end users of when to go direct to object storage. And interestingly enough, we came up with a chart, Sam, if you can jump to the next slide, that I think helps to layer in when you might make these kinds of decisions. So first, thinking about networking and bandwidth, right? What is the impact to a specific environment if you were to back something up directly to object storage? Now, of course, the cool thing about Veeam not being a appliance-based vendor is that we have an incredible network of object storage vendors that we work with. So of course, we work with AWS S3, Microsoft Azure Blob, but we also work with, I believe we're over 30 different object storage vendors outside of those two big cloud object storage vendors that you could work with on premises. You could back up to their cloud hosted infrastructure. Wasabi comes to mind in that particular play. So there's lots of different ways that you can kind of combat this concept of bandwidth. Something else to keep in mind, though, would be all about the need for capacity. If you plan to back up often or store something for an extended period of time, that's another consideration of when you might go direct versus scaling out into a capacity and then an archive, et cetera. And latency is another big one. I think we talk a lot about latency in the cloud world, and there are absolutely times when the cloud simply has too much latency for what you need to get done. But if you're backing up, a laptop, for example, the latency doesn't really matter on something like that, right? Because you can easily just sacrifice some of the things that you otherwise would expect for a tier 1 application in service of being able to just back something up to the cheapest storage possible. So this might be a nice kind of way of thinking about when you might want to go direct to object storage or direct to cloud storage. We also have a blog out on veeam.com that details this diagram a little bit more. But I also encourage you to join the Veeam community if you're not already. The Veeam Community Hub is a great place where fellow end users can come together and make recommendations. You can kind of talk a little bit about what your environment is or what your needs are and ask other people's opinions and come up with the best solution for you and your organization. Again, the nice thing about having that flexibility is you get the choice, but we also have put together this great community place where people can help you make that choice. So whether you're taking a look at this blog that we came up with or whether you go to the community, there's lots of places to help make that kind of decision. And ultimately, the choice is yours.
So Anthony, what are you seeing in the field? Like, I would say that you're easily the one that talks with customers and service providers on a more frequent basis than myself and Leah. What are you seeing folks doing?
Yeah, I think obviously if you think about the previous slide where we looked at, what we're actually doing from the point of view of shifting data, from on-premises to a landing zone, tiering it off to capacity and then going into archive. Veeam was very careful in making sure that we did that part of it right. This whole policy-based approach and the scale backup repository was something that we made sure that we innovated on initially, right? And it was very important to lead our customers to that as they moved from the thought process of thinking about object storage for not just archival, long-term, cheap and deep storage, but as it is today to become more almost primary storage, right? So I think going back to this slide, just talking about the fact that Veeam really thought about this differently. We saw the future with regards to the way that object storage was going to work with traditional storage on premises object storage as well with the public cloud. That in that true sort of multi-hybrid, that is the hybrid way, right? In terms of having storages that's traditional block file, NAS, on premises and then moving into object storage. But that object storage can now be local on premises as well. And if we move through to the other slide, or the next slide, the big point here is that this really builds on the fact that traditionally you really had to choose 2 out of the 3, okay, in terms of bandwidth capacity and latency. Latency equals performance as well to a certain extent because the lower the latency with the higher bandwidth, you get greater performance. Traditionally, object storage has been on the right-hand side in terms of capacity and bandwidth. But what we're seeing with the improvements in disk technology, with the improvements of actual, the actual robustness of more storage vendors out there doing object storage as a primary, we're seeing this technology reach a point where it can be used and thought of as a primary storage. And that's where this graphic comes into play, because if you balance bandwidth with latency with capacity, then all of a sudden you've got like the perfect file system. And to that extent, that's what object storage is becoming. And what we're seeing in the field when I talk to customers, be it at large enterprises, being in small, medium businesses, or what service providers are doing, they are looking towards object storage both on premises and in the cloud to really be, the total of where they store their object today, where they store their data today, and then moving forward. So yeah, I'm really excited, by the way, that Veeam as a company has led the way in talking about, object storage as being that primary storage moving forward. And then what we've done to help our customers work with us to be able to not only back up their data to object storage, but also maybe leverage it for a primary or a secondary location.
Absolutely. So I think, the whole backup targeting of cloud storage really aligns well with that opportunistic approach. But as we get more mature in the opportunistic and start going into that systematic approach, we start to discuss the whole recover/migrate to cloud motion, right? So this is, again, taking those traditional workloads that are running on premises and starting to spin those up in the cloud. And Veeam is excuse me, much more than just a data protection vendor. We can take that production fresh data that lives in the backup, the VBK, it's a common file format that we use across pretty much every single one of our solutions, and then just choose to instantiate that, recover that in the public cloud, shut down what's on premises, and now all of a sudden we've got a recovery motion or recovery use case for our Veeam solution. And we see a number of customers doing this because then they don't have to go out and procure purpose-built migration software. They don't even potentially have to go to a service provider or professional services in order to do this for them. They can just use the tool that they know and love to recover that into the cloud. So Anthony, why don't you walk us through what's on the screen here and again, what you're seeing in the field?
Yeah, I think as customers are moving their workloads, through attrition to the public cloud specifically, they need a way to be able to migrate that data easily. And a lot of opportunities that are out there might lend themselves to replication, and that's all well and good, and that's okay for some systems. But what we've been seeing is that the technology that Veeam has with our VBK file format, it's a self-describing format, like Leah talked about. The fact that we're software-driven, hardware agnostic, and storage agnostic means that when you take a backup with Veeam and it sits in that VBK format, it automatically becomes portable and mobile. Okay, and a lot of the customers that we talk to that are looking to undertake migration services. In fact, there's one major airline that I've been involved in early conversations around the use of our technology to effectively shift their workloads from, as you can see here, effectively almost exactly from their on-premises data center to an AWS cloud. And they're looking to leverage our technology to do the backup and then the recovery, okay? Because what we do is through that technology, we don't have as many complicated steps along the way. That means that the actual workload will be recovered quicker, more efficiently, but also with less hassle. So I think that's it. If you can guarantee that your data or your workloads are going to recover with ease on the other side, I think you'll take that over, say, what replication might offer. So that's an interesting side note that, even though this is in the purest sense from a recovery migration sort of story, it's a restoration of the data. We're still seeing a lot of uptake and, interest in that particular method. And in terms of the recovery as well, obviously we've been pretty front of innovation when it comes to innovation, recovery technology. So the instant recovery technology that we patented back in the early days of Veeam, that's grown and become a industry standard across all vendors now with regards to how you recover your data. If you can recover your data and your workloads quicker through your software onto the storage of your choice, it's obviously going to mean that you're going to have less downtime. So it's very important as well.
All right, fantastic. So then once that workload is now landed in the cloud, living in the cloud. Does the data need to be protected, Leah?
No, of course not. The cloud totally is high availability and it works always, forever and ever. Didn't you guys hear that? That the cloud just always works?
And that
That's what
concludes our
people tell me.
webinar. Thanks very much
Yep,
for joining.
thanks everybody. No, I mean, the reality is with cloud workloads, anything and everything that can happen on premises can actually still happen in the cloud. The cloud is inherently optimized, it's upgraded regularly comparative to on-premises environments. It's oftentimes hosted in locations that are less impacted by things like natural disasters. There's redundant power, you replicate to different availability zones. Yes, it is highly available, but it's your data, your responsibility. The things that can happen to the data within the infrastructure on premises can still happen in the cloud. So we talked at the beginning of this webinar about security being top of mind. And that's absolutely a very plausible recovery scenario that you have to prepare for in the cloud. You absolutely could have any kind of cyber attack, but there's lots of other kinds of recovery scenarios too. You may have some sort of accidental deletion of a VM. You may need to migrate workloads from one kind of environment to another. The possibilities are really endless. And so when we talk with a lot of end users, but especially some of these folks that work in the cloud day in and day out, the AWS engineers, the Azure architects, we find that there's a general understanding of these recovery scenarios, but maybe not necessarily the in-depth knowledge that folks who have spent more time working in backup likely understand. Moreover, there's a sort of easy button mentality with a lot of the folks that we talk with. So yes, yeah, backup, I get it, what's the easiest way I can get this done so that I can go back to the cool shit? That's kind of the sort of conversations that we end up having. And so what we find is that there's a lot of basic snapshot scheduling, and that seems to be an okay checkbox in people's heads. It oftentimes is also looking at something like the first-party backup tools that AWS provides, that Google provides. So that might sort of get it done if you squint a little bit, but I think, most of our Veeam community is pretty well versed in all the things that can and will happen, and recognize that there's a lot of cost inefficiencies. You're not taking advantage of security best practices. So moving beyond snapshotting is really where we need to get these infrastructures in order to be truly resilient and up to par with what we can do on premises in the environments that we really control. So Sam, do you want to talk a little bit about architecturally how that backup process might work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you make comments around limitations of the snapshot, and certainly they are absolutely present, but I would say that there's a number of positives to the snapshot as well, and sometimes it's pretty much our only line of defense when it comes to protecting a cloud hosted workload. But snapshots are, first of all, very, very easy to take. We can go directly into our cloud console, manually take a snapshot if we wish. We can choose to script those, or we can use a first or third party solution to automate the creation of that snapshot in line with policies. And again, the snapshot also offers us very, very low recovery time objectives. They're very, very fast to recover from, and very low recovery point objectives. We can take them much, much more frequently. But there certainly are drawbacks, right? And I think the kind of major one, there's two big ones. Firstly, security. A snapshot is often not independent of the production data that you are looking to protect. So if that production account, subscription, project, or data were to ever become compromised, then the snapshot likely has become compromised as well. And that's going to render you with nothing to recover from. The big one that I always point to is code spaces. This was way back in 2014. I can't believe that's 10 years ago now, but ultimately they fell to a ransomware breach and had their data held ransom. Hey, if you don't pay it, we're going to delete all your production data. They said, hey, we got a backup, which was in the form of snapshots. we're not going to pay that. We're just going to recover the environment. And unfortunately, everything was destroyed. The snapshots as well as production. Codespaces had nothing to recover from and went from a viable business to out of business in the space of a day. So this is really why we need to take an image-based backup of that data alongside the snapshot and start to store that in a protection environment. So this is logically separated from production. In AWS, that's accounts. In Azure, it's subscriptions. In Google Cloud, it's projects. And store that within object storage within that cloud. And that's going to unlock two major benefits. The first one is around cost. Object storage is substantially more cost effective than the volumes or disks that snapshots live on. So we can retain that data in line with corporate mandates, compliance requirements, without blowing up our budgets. To paint a picture, an EBS snapshot, the list price is 5 cents per gig per month. The first tier of Amazon S3 object storage I mentioned earlier, 2.3 cents per gig per month. So we're already at half the cost. Going down to S3 Glacier, Glacier Deep Archive, you start talking about 0.04 or it's 0.4 cents per gig per month, down to like, again, 0.00099 cents per gig per month. It's much, much more cost effective. Again, downsides of that are on the performance, but again, we can retain data. The likelihood of needing to recover from that as the data ages diminishes, so we can meet those retention requirements and still free up capital to invest in other areas in the cloud. The other piece that unlocks, at least from a Veeam perspective, is this is also stored in that VBK format. And that's going to unlock the portability that Anthony was talking about. So not only is that living and, from a security perspective, improving our data protection, but it's also not locking us in or out of any one specific platform. The piece that we were talking about recovering or migrating to the cloud, also works in the other direction. So if a production workload in one cloud is needing to be recovered on premises or to another cloud, or migrated on premises or to another cloud, because of that self-describing common file format, you can now do that with Veeam. And that's, again, freeing up that whole data portability conversation that we see a number of customers taking advantage of. Anthony, anything you'd like to add around this one?
No, I think obviously going back to the way that a business can be impacted because of trust in the cloud. I've seen this many times. It was my number one fear as a manager and owner of a platform, in that if we got compromised, not being able to recover, not being able to bring back the data, or losing customer data, that was like the worst nightmare. So it's something that a lot of IT admins still fear today. And you shouldn't put your trust just in the cloud. And to that extent as well, the fact that we are living in this multi-cloud world as well, hybrid cloud, you shouldn't put all of your faith in the one particular cloud at the same time. I think that's something that people do tend to do today, because they are sold by from a corporate level, or even a personal sort of zealot type of level. They want to stay with the one particular cloud. However, what we know now is that you can't trust the cloud to protect your data, and that's been very openly expressed by these public clouds as well. There's that shared responsibility model, but suffice to say, when you've got a product like Veeam that can come in and do the legwork for you, let Veeam be the data protection software for that cloud. And even to that extent, a lot of these platforms do have their own backup, which are good enough, yes. But you want to sort of give that to the professionals as well. You want to, make sure that you wouldn't sort of get your BMW serviced by a Mercedes dealership, would you? So that's kind of in the same way. You want to kind of make sure that the professionals do the professional thing, and then they run what they're good at, which is basically running these services. But specifically, when it comes to infrastructure as a service backup, having a solution that unlocks that data when you back it up and makes it portable is very important at the same time.
You really bring up a good point there, and which is, you've got your long instantiated data protection vendor of choice on premises, and as folks go to the cloud, it's because it's so easy. Folks often tend to adopt the first party solution from that cloud provider, but that in itself offers challenges. Is it good enough? Yes, but it's just another product within the portfolio that you have to learn, manage, maintain. And again, it locks that data into that platform. So utilizing someone like Veeam, not only are you going to get that, I'm going to put a pound in the swear jar for saying this, but single pane of glass for all of your environments, on-prem, IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, all these different cloud vendors. But again, it's that data portability, which we'll get onto in a little bit. But this is very much aligning with that opportunistic and somewhat systematic approach to the cloud. But as workloads do evolve and become more and more cloud native, going serverless, what's the role of backup there? We're essentially dealing with lines of code that live on a function as a service. Well, hey, that function as a service is still referencing data that lives on some form of storage, right? So again, that could be a database, it could be a file share. More often and more frequently, we're starting to see that reference data living in object storage. Object storage has come a long way. Yes, it's very cost effective, but the performance is getting better and better and better. It's becoming that, as Anthony said, that default storage of choice. So, that data, that reference data still needs to be protected. And again, Veeam can help out with the protection of that data as well. Here's a simple Azure scenario where you've got your Azure function executing your lines of code. You could export that as to have a copy of that data if you wish, but that reference data here, it's living in a SQL instance, excuse me. We can create that staged copy of that SQL instance and then do the image-based backup, tearing that off onto different object storage for the reasons that we mentioned before. So, protection of PaaS or serverless microservices environments is very much a necessity, but also for containerized workloads. So, Anthony, why don't you talk to us about containerized workloads with Veeam?
Yeah, I think just before that, I want to have a sort of little point here about at reInvent last year. A few of us were there. I think, Sam, you were with me there. The conversation for the first time since I've been going to that event for 5 or 6 years started to really talk to the fact that you had to think about backing up the data, even though you're in this PaaS or serverless scenario. So I think right now the conversation is shifting where the professionals in the IT, DevOps, platform ops, data scientists, whatever they're doing, leveraging these functions, these serverless capabilities, understand that, they might be provided by the public cloud. And then they might be leveraging hybrid cloud elements. But because there's data that's still being created, or they're pulling it from some sort of data source, they still need to think about the protection of that data because that is now super critical. So I think to that end, we're having great conversations around that today, where else, before we probably weren't in the conversation when it comes to containers. Veeam's had a very strong initially partnership with Kasten and then an acquisition with Kasten as well. So, that acquisition is now nearly 3-4 years old, actually. I can't believe it's been that long. However, what we gave ourselves there is the ability to cross over and being able to protect with the best product on the market, containers and containerized applications, as long as it's on Kubernetes. That point must be made, because obviously when we talk about the containerization world, when it comes to Kasten, that interfaces with Kubernetes. But no matter where it is, no matter where the data is being created, whether it's in serverless, whether it's being created within a container and a Kubernetes platform, you still have to back it up, and that's where the Veeam Data Platform comes into play.
Awesome. So let's start to round out the entirety of this story around this. Yes, data portability, as you see on the screen here, but just the federated management, monitoring, and governance of all your data with the Veeam platform. There's a lot of arrows here, but again, it's just truly showing the power and flexibility that the platform has to fit into what it is you would like to do today and what it is that you might want to do tomorrow. So, the backup that is of production workloads can live on premises. It can be done directly to the cloud storage. We can recover that data into cloud infrastructure as a service, instances, VMs running in the cloud, and then vice versa. That EC2 instance that we're protecting to S3 can be instantly recovered as a virtual machine on premises, streaming that data out of that S3 bucket. It can be permanently recovered to a VM in the data center. It can be recovered to a VM in the public cloud or one of the other public clouds, vice versa. really it goes in a multitude of different directions. Leah, is there any more color that you'd like to add around what's on the slide that you see here that's kind of really bringing everything that we've discussed together in that, cloud optimized with the centralized management, monitoring, governance, analytics?
Yeah, I think, the big thing to take away here is the fact that we are so portable. And this isn't just conceptual or a nice to have or an insurance policy. We really do talk with customers all the time about how they really see Veeam as a strategic opportunity for them to be able to migrate into a cloud, exfiltrate from a cloud, all using that VBK file format. So because of that, then you can take a look at how to up-level that into some of these more strategic projects. So if I were looking at this slide, that would be my big takeaway. It's not just a gimmick that AWS, Azure, Google are on here. We could just as easily add a lot of other components to the Veeam Data Platform to this kind of diagram, but that would be my big takeaway.
Absolutely. And one of the other points that we mentioned within that, that full-on optimized use of the cloud was around optimization. I don't think you can do that without the monitoring and reporting. And Anthony, I know this is something that you hold near and dear to your heart, not just in Veeam One, but our service provider console as well. So why don't you walk us through a bit around that?
Yeah, I think the next couple of images basically are an example of what we're doing around bringing this hybrid world together. So this is a snippet from Veeam 1, so V12. So, you can see here that we're integrating data protection visuals. And not only do we look at on-premises workloads, which traditionally, when you look at Veeam 1 over the years, it would have been vSphere and Hyper-V environments. Now we're looking at a public cloud. So over here, if you had workloads that were being backed up, you can see virtual machines, computers, file shares, databases, and networks. So if you've got any of those split across AWS's or Google, they're going to basically come up here as well. So this is the first level integration that we get when you look at Veeam 1. And then, moving through, the next is a report. So this is a protected cloud incident report that Veeam 1 can get out as well. And what this is going to do, this is actually going to tap into, in this case, we're looking at an AWS environment. So look at that VPC, look at a number of VPCs, look at the organization, and it'll basically tell you, how many instances you have of EC2, RDS, and whatever it is, and basically tell you how many are unprotected. So, letting you know that, hey, you've got workloads sitting in this particular organization, but they aren't protected, so you better do something about it. So this is just a way of us to, to make this product valuable for customers, just to make sure that they're aware of what's happening in their stable. And in this case, you can see that I probably need to get on and actually back up some stuff in my AWS instance, because at the moment, I'm fully 100% not protected. And then finally, Service Provider Console. Now, Service Provider Console is a platform that traditionally has been put out there for our service providers, as the name states, can be accessed though via for enterprise customers as well under certain scenarios. So the great thing about this is that we're really tying this into multiple levels of the Veeam platform. And no better example of this particular report here that shows, again, not too much data, because obviously, this is my little test environment here. It shows you the totality of some information around your backup replication. So if you're doing backups, virtual machines, file shares, servers, or workstations, if we're leveraging Cloud Connect, so are you backing up into a cloud and service provider? Again, we haven't talked a lot about that, but that also extends hybridity. How do you leverage a cloud provider to give you a piece of storage to be able to back up to? That's what we talk about there. And then the Veeam agents, the public cloud backup, so what we can protect there, and then SaaS-based backup. So Microsoft 365, how many users are we backing up, how many group sites, and how many teams if we had that as well. So this is a really good view of, a great example of how Veeam perceives the whole, spectrum of data, applications, and where they live. And ultimately, we don't really care where they do live, because we can see them, and if we can see them, we can back them up, and if we can back them up, we can report on them, and more importantly, restore them if you need to and your organization is in a bit of trouble.
Awesome. So we're getting really close to time. We do have some stories from the field here that ultimately just going to kind of glaze over in the interest of time, just so we can start to bring this all back together. But a number of organizations, again, utilizing Veeam across the entirety of their hybrid multi-cloud organization as they kind of progress through that cloud maturity. Again, taking workloads that are on premises, backing them up to the cloud, starting to migrate workloads that live on premises and putting them into the cloud, protecting them once they land there, and then also having the opportunity to push those over to a different cloud or bring them back on premises if they ever want to. It's again ultimately Veeam just being able to mold them, itself into your environment, however it is that you want to do that today and however that might be in the future. And that's not just from a technology perspective that we've been talking about today, it's also from a licensing perspective. Licensing is not one of the most fun or sexiest things to talk about, but the Veeam Universal license is as portable as the data you need your data to be. So anytime that you go through some sort of change within your environment, we can help you do that. You don't need to call Veeam and procure new software, or new licenses. You don't need to even launch a license support ticket. Just start using that single console to protect the workloads where it is today, move it, protect it where it lands, and the license is just going to automatically, dynamically move with that, so you don't have to. So, the Veeam Data Platform truly does power the hybrid, whether that's in the public cloud, software as a service, virtualized workloads, your enterprise applications, unstructured data, as well as physical machines. Whatever you look like today, we're going to be able to fit in there. But we've got VeeamON coming up in Miami real soon, and Leah, I know that this is your baby. You are our SME for anything and everything when it comes to the events team for planning for VeeamON. So why don't you walk us through a little bit of what folks can expect and why they should be coming?
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned earlier that the Veeam community is so important to us. We consider pulling everybody together to be one of the most important things that we can do as an organization. So just like we have done for many years running, I think I know Anthony was there. Sam, I'm pretty sure you were there for the very first VeeamON way back in 2014. Since then, we've been running this really amazing community user event. And so as Sam said, I'm one of the content chiefs for this year, alongside my partner in crime, Rick Vanover. And we've definitely made this event the cloudiest event that we have had. And a lot of why we did that is because we recognize that so many of our end users are really trying to wrap their heads around cloud technology. How can we use the cloud to extend storage environments? How can we understand the unique needs of SaaS data protection? And where do we fit in this new hybrid cloud infrastructure world? So to do that, we have a whole host of really amazing sessions, both on site and on the virtual portal. So whether you are local to the US and want to join us in Miami, Florida, or if you are coming to us from around the world, and you want to maybe call in through virtual, Veeam team has you covered with lots of really great content. And all three of us are going to be speakers. Sam is actually going to do an interview with a chief information security officer named Robbie Hudak. She joined us very briefly at the V12 launch event earlier this year, but we wanted to really showcase her story, which is a true multi-cloud story, just like we've been talking about. So if you're wondering, like, what does my boss think about all of this data protection stuff? How can I maybe up level my conversations with my boss and make them understand that this is strategic and important? This is the session for you, because Robbie does think it's strategic important to have data protection front and center of these sort of hybrid cloud conversations. So that would be a really great session to check out. Anthony also has a really great session with our Director of Product Management for Cloud Appliances and Alliances. His name is Dustin Albertson, and the two of them are going to be talking about object storage innovation with Veeam. I think this is the 5th time running that Anthony and Dustin have brought this session to the floor. Do you want to talk a little bit about that session, Anthony?
Yeah, it's always exciting, and I still can't pronounce what we initially
cumulonimbus.
Yeah, I'll get it right after maybe the 6th time. But no, I think obviously to highlight this session, we're taking a bit of a different stance this time around. We're taking a little bit of a retrospective, on where object storage has come from a Veeam perspective. And then I think we're going to just basically touch a little bit on, how we're moving forward with the innovation that we do with our partners, which Dustin is, well plugged into, and then what's coming in 12A and beyond with regards to object storage. I think have a little bit of fun because I think that's going to be the last session before the party on Wednesday night.
Yeah.
So yeah, we want to be able to do that. But I just want to comment from the point of view of the cloud. I think it's really great to see cloud focused, and from our perspective, we still do very well with service providers, but as that molds, as I said at the start, we're all molding into this hybrid world of service provider, on premises, and public cloud. I think it's very representative of all of the sessions that we've got at this event. It's very, very slanted towards that, which excites me.
Yeah, absolutely.
The one thing that's not on this slide as well are the cloud labs that we're going to be debuting at Veeam. So if you want to get hands-on with a cloud environment and with Veeam in the public cloud, this is going to be a great opportunity for you to do so. We know that cloud skilling is not necessarily easy, so we're going to have a ton of experts and lab stations available so you can go get hands-on with the product, learn exactly how it works, and then bring that back to your organization and help out there. So super excited for Veeam. We really hope to see you there. I do want to say a big thank you to everyone joining us today. We got a lot of questions coming in, so I made sure that we answered those throughout the session, but also a big thank you to Leah and Anthony as well for the great conversation, so you didn't just have to hear me ramble on for, what have we been going for, 50 or so minutes. So any parting comments from you guys before we end this one?
Just thank you so much for the time. I know that everybody gets a little digital fatigue with so many webinars and online events. I certainly miss the in-person experience. I can't wait to see a lot of folks in Miami in the next couple of weeks. But we are going to be on the Q&A. So if you guys do have questions, please pop in questions. We're super happy to help get you connected with the resources that you need. Anthony, any last words?
No, all well said. Good webinar, good information, and looking forward to where we take this hybrid platform moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, thanks once again, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you at Veeam, either in person in Miami or virtually. Thanks again. Bye.